It is something much bigger about where we are as a society. Is it about internet porn? It's been totally desensitised that men would think this is either okay to do or erotic to do.
This will start a whole new debate, actually, in France about the sentencing of such a horrific crime and whether it really matches up to the times we live in.
There is so much about this that's so disturbing.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, that's on February the 24th, and finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there.
C'est avec une profonde émotion que je m'exprime aujourd'hui devant vous. Ce procès a été une épreuve très difficile. Et à cet instant, je pense en premier lieu à mes 3 enfants.
That was Gisèle Pelicot. You know who she is by now. She's the woman who waived her anonymity to tell France, and indeed the world, about the most horrific case of multiple rape it is almost possible to imagine. She was standing outside the court today, talking about her profound emotion and her thoughts with her 3 children. As sentences were handed down, one of which will see her ex-husband jailed for drugging and rape for 20 years.
And there were 50 other men convicted as well who will also face jail sentences for what they did in this macabre and grotesque mass rape, the biggest that France has ever seen. But have we witnessed something that was unique to this place near Avignon? Or does this lift the lid on a wider problem and crisis in the way that men relate to women? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
And later in the podcast, we're going to be talking about the Observer newspaper and its purchase by Tortoise Media, and we have the first interview with the new owner, the head of Tortoise Media, who has bought the Observer in a kind of bizarre takeover, and that is James Harding. That's still to come.
But we're going to start with the story of Gisèle Pelicot, who has become something of an icon, I think it's fair to say, to women right around the world for her decision to waive her anonymity in this rape case. And you should be warned that the details of this are extremely upsetting, because it is the story of how her husband, a 72-year-old man, not only drugged his wife, not only raped her while she was drugged, but also invited people, strangers from around the community, to come and do the same. And they did. More than 80 different men came to rape the wife, who was not even conscious.
The detail that has come out in court, the detail that people have watched because he videoed and recorded the whole bloody thing, are just kind of mind-boggling. Yeah. That there are men having sex with a woman who is snoring because she's fast asleep because she's been so heavily drugged. She's faced gynecological problems since then. And today was the denouement of the whole case in Avignon, in what has become France's biggest rape trial. But of course, it's not just about 50 individuals facing charges for rape. It is something much bigger about where we are as a society. Is it about internet porn? Is it about people having kind of been totally desensitised that men would think this is either okay to do or erotic to do? Because it just seems unfathomable what has happened.
And the family were in the court today when the sentences were being handed down. And I think it's fair to say that although there was satisfaction at hearing that guilty verdict read out so many times, there was a slight astonishment that the sentences themselves didn't seem to be weightier, longer. France gives a maximum 20-year sentence for rape, and that is what Dominique, her ex-husband, got. But there were other men, including one who, as you say, had found himself tape recorded, tried to pretend he hadn't been there, ended up saying that his body might have been there, but his brain wasn't there. That was his actual defence, and he came away with a 12-year sentence. And there were many that were lesser than that. And I guess this will start a whole new debate, actually, in France about the sentencing of such a horrific crime and whether it really matches up to the times we live in.
The other interesting thing that I thought about the case today was that the defendants often had their own families there in support of them. And there is a sort of moral ambiguity, I think, from certain of these men who think, well, I thought it was all right. The husband told me she was fine about it, so I thought it was okay.
It was his wife.
Yeah, it was his wife.
So I was just going along with what he said.
I was just going along with what he said. So, yeah, what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
And you just think, golly, and the idea that the families would be in support whilst the husband is sent down, kids watching their dad sent down for rape. It's kind of, there is so much about this that's so disturbing.
Well, Amelia Jen is the Channel 4 correspondent, and she's there in Avignon for them at the moment. And she watched the whole thing, and what you get from her is this sense of the proximity of all the bodies and all the people and all the emotion in this tiny courtroom in southern France. Amelia, thanks so much for joining us. Just give us a sense of the emotion that was playing out in court today.
I mean, it was incredible. People were queuing from 7 a.m. outside the courthouse, probably earlier, just to get in to support her. When the verdicts came out, there, people were shouting, chanting. The most sort of striking element of it for me really was just before Gisèle Pelicot arrived, all of the suspects, not all of them, but a considerable amount of them, arrived on foot with packed bags, walking into court past more than 100 people who'd been waiting since dawn to support her. So that was quite an incredible thing to see. I was doing a piece to camera and one of them just walked straight in front, and they were being shouted at. The protesters were shouting, rapists, we see you. And then we all went into court. The verdicts were handed down. It was quite quick, one by one. He found them all guilty of either rape or sexual assault, but the majority of them rape. And then outside it just sort of erupted. We could see Gisèle from relatively far away, but she was sort of watching, looking at each man as the sentence was held down.
And what about the families of the men? Because I've read reports that a lot of them were in tears, and you kind of think, what are you in tears about? Is it that you've been caught? Is it that you've been ashamed? It's such an extraordinary case.
I mean, it was really interesting. Again, a lot of them were coming in with their families, including some of them really quite young children as well. And then obviously once the verdicts were handed down, they sort of burst out the courtroom. Some of them just left. Others kind of stayed for a little bit. There was a lot of anger. We saw one of the men actually was able to leave court because he had served his sentence, or the custodial part at least already. So he left, and he was completely besieged by protesters. His family, we think it was his partner, was following him, and she was just incredibly upset, telling everyone to turn their cameras off. So it was incredibly dramatic. I mean, that's the most amazing thing about all of this, really, how close everyone was to each other. I mean, it's a relatively big court, but there were so many people there. You had Gisèle Pelicot walking in just moments after the men who raped her. You had the families in the mix as well, and people shouting, hundreds of people outside, hundreds of journalists inside as well, just all sort of next to each other.
The phrase that we keep coming back to on this whole trial is about the normalness, the normality of the men involved. It's a whole community of nearly 50 men, 50 rapists who were all just, regular jobs, regular dads, regular husbands. There's something that's sort of quite shocking about that. And
everyone here is calling them Monsieur Tout le Monde collectively, just because there are so many of them, and they come from kind of all walks of life. There's a journalist, a firefighter. A lot of them actually are in professions where they have to care for people. There's a nurse as well. And again, the proximity thing, the fact that so many men were willing to do this when given the chance, who happened to live also so close to the victim, is really sort of astonishing.
Wasn't there some suggestion today that maybe we try to make sense of this, to say, oh my God, this is this one strange village, that it was hyper-local and just some really weird shit went down there. And the suggestion being that this is the dark web and this may be happening in all sorts of other places as well, but we just don't know about it.
And I suppose that's the most amazing thing as well, is the fact that Dominique Pelicot so meticulously documented this. And really, he only got caught because a security guard in a supermarket happened to see him upskirting people. The police arrested him for that. They seized his devices. And it was only then that they came across those videos. And in fact, there are 51 men who have been sentenced today. But there are, we think, up to or police say up to 30 more who they haven't been able to identify.
It's incredible. Amelia, Jen, thank you so much for giving up your time for us today, and good luck with the rest of your reports.
This whole case has been so jaw-dropping that we've kind of brought you the facts of what has unfolded today in court and the sentencing passed. I suspect we'll be coming back to this in weeks and months to come about the sort of cultural implications and what it says about society and where we are now. That we will return to. Coming up next, we'll be talking about the sale of The Observer to this small startup called Tortoise Media, and we'll be talking to the new owner of The Observer, James Harding.
The story that we've been watching in the media over the last few weeks has been what's happening at The Observer. And this week, it did get sold. It is now owned by Tortoise Media, founded by James Harding, who used to be the Times editor and also, funnily enough, our boss at the BBC. And it is part of a deal that would see The Observer newspaper stay in weekly print, but also look for new subscription digital sort of offerings behind a paywall, which is something that has made a lot of the journalists pretty unhappy. Now, we brought you one of those voices last week, Carol Cadwallader, who voiced to us why she was so nervous about this deal going through. Today, we thought we'd bring you the horse's mouth.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Carol Cadwallader. I mean, it was almost unanimous that staff on The Guardian and The Observer voting to strike because they thought it was such a terrible deal and that it would jeopardise the last liberal newspaper, liberal Sunday newspaper in the UK, and that its existence would be under threat by what Tortoise Media were doing. So, James Harding, welcome to the Newsagents. This is your first interview that you've given since the sale has gone through, and we're grateful for that. Is The Observer still going to be a newspaper?
Yes. So we've committed, John, to making sure that The Observer remains in print for the foreseeable future. You know, we're talking about 5-10 years, who knows what happens beyond there. But the point is that for years, The Observer has held a really special place in the heart of journalists. So historically, this was the paper that George Orwell, who used to write for it, called the enemy of nonsense. It was the paper that great photographers like Don McCullum and Jane Bone took pictures for. It was the place that had championed, when many other people neglected him, Nelson Mandela. It was a paper that represented what newspapers really stood for. But for years it's been just in print, and its journalism carried on The Guardian. Our plan is we keep it in print every Sunday, but we now give it a digital life that runs through the week.
OK, so for me, I pick up a Sunday newspaper. I want to read how my team has done in the football. You're going to have sports reporters?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to keep the sections, the sports sections. We're going to build out a business section.
You're going to have people doing reports on daily games, or if a story breaks in Moscow, because at the moment you've got 30 foreign correspondents around the world because of The Guardian. You won't have any.
So let's do the two different bits. One, do you really think that the best you can do is match reports in a world in which you can see football live on a host of different platforms? You can see different people's Substacks or Twitter feeds. Our view is that the value of journalism is the power of its investigations, independent thinking, insight, a guide to interesting
living. So there won't be match reports?
So I'm not particularly bothered about match reports. I don't think you buy a paper today for match reports. You buy it for the quality of its insight, for what it can tell you that you can't learn elsewhere. And what I'm saying, John, is there are a bunch of people, probably like us, who still love the experience of reading a paper, that time when you read and think, and it's uninterrupted, and messages don't pop up on your phone. But there are a generation of people who don't know just quite how brilliant the Observer is. Move away from sport for a second. The arts and culture reporting of the Observer is, I think, the best in the country by far. And I just want to make my point. And if you're not necessarily reading Susanna Clapp on theatre, or Laura Cumming on art, or Fiona Maddox on music, this is a way in which we're going to make sure that reaches a whole generation of new readers and listeners and viewers that it doesn't currently reach.
But okay, foreign news. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have access to the foreign correspondents in Moscow, in Hong Kong, in wherever else you want to be.
So our view is that The Guardian is a brilliant paper, and it does a brilliant job and has an amazing 24/7 news service. The Observer is going to build out its own network of foreign correspondents and contributors and editors. But what we're trying to do is something different.
You're moving away from daily news.
We're definitely not going to be in the 24/7 breaking news business. Our job is to try and say, let's try and make sense of the news. Let's try and give people...
So it doesn't sound a lot like a newspaper, that's my point. No, I mean, why don't you just say it's something very different from what a conventional Sunday newspaper is?
Well, firstly, I think all news organisations are changing. We're sitting here in a podcast studio, and let's face it, podcasts and the discussion of the news has fundamentally changed the way in which people consume it. The very last thing we should be doing is sitting around saying, you know what we're going to do? Is we're going to do exactly what's always been done before. What we do see, though, John, is a world in which people have taken some of the great names in news, take the New Yorker or the Atlantic or Die Zeit. There are a load of those that have said, we can still reimagine what exists in print, make it more relevant and insightful in a world where essentially information and news is commoditized and coming at you every which way, and at the same time, alongside that print product, build out something that's digital. And so people, essentially, wherever they want to get it, whether it's in print or on screen, can get the best journalism that's out there.
This has gone down really badly with the workforce. I mean, you don't often get Guardian journalists, Observer journalists striking. 93% of journalists voted to strike. 6 former editors, I think, intervened to try and urge you to stop it, and said the sale would be a gamble.
So I've actually just come from a meeting with people who are beginning to say, actually, how are we going to build the future Observer? And look, Emily, good people can disagree. And journalists, let's face it, in particular, can have different views on things.
93% of the workforce strike.
So let's just go through that, though, for a moment, because we've been, and I hope continue to be, extremely respectful of the views of others who have different views. The Guardian and the Observer is the Sunday paper of the Guardian. The Guardian has one union, and the vast majority of people, out of the 400 or so people who chose and voted to strike, the vast majority, 80% plus, work for the Guardian. They don't work for the Observer. Now, I respect their view. Their view was we should keep it. The Guardian and the Scott Trust, the owners of the Guardian, should keep it. Our view was, and the reason we didn't say, OK, fair enough, was actually we've seen the Observer in Guardian ownership for 30 years. And 15 years ago, in 2009, The Guardian took a decision which was there's going to be one brand, and that brand is The Guardian. And there's going to be one website, and that website is The Guardian. And since then, what you've seen is the very slow but very significant decline in the print sale of The Observer, and without a digital identity, a digital brand of its own.
I guess I'm just saying, James, you haven't made that argument well. It felt like a stitch-up. It was only public in September. When you think of the conversations that we're having about the Telegraph, about the sale, with the government involving, this just happened so quickly. I mean, people were on strike when that emergency meeting with the Scott Trust took place that sort of sealed the deal.
But Emily, are you really saying, I mentioned you say the Telegraph is a good example. So the Telegraph's been running an auction for 2 years, right? It's not managed to resolve its future. The paper is still trying to figure out what's going to happen to it. I think actually,
but it's a tender. It's a tender series, isn't it?
But let's just go through it properly, because I think it is a really good question and one that's been frequently asked. We approached The Guardian at the very beginning of the year, had the first meeting at the beginning of February, and went through a long process where they first stopped and thought about, A, do they see a future for The Observer? Do they think they're the best home for The Observer? And I think the recognition that the call they'd made in 2009 required them either to say, no, actually, we're going to reverse course and we're going to invest in a separate, distinct identity for the Observer, a digital brand. So we're going to try and run two brands together. And you can understand that the New York Times made the same call when it came to the Boston Globe. They said, no, look, we're going to have one brand. It's going to be the New York Times.
So why are journalists so unhappy, James? All I'm saying to you is, if what you're saying is the business model of the future, why haven't you communicated that? Why are so many journalists convinced that you're not putting enough money into it, that £25 million over 5 years gets you nowhere, that nobody's going to pay for this behind a wall, that they're going to lose their sort of ability to talk freely as they did at The Guardian and Observer? You haven't made that case to them. They're really unhappy.
Well, a large number of people have taken a different view. Actually, if you look at it, there are also a lot of people who've said, how are you going to make sure that you renew the Observer? Because if it stays where it is, it will gradually disappear. And actually, the Scott Trust, the Guardian itself, a very large number of people who may have a different view from the union, and let's face it, understandably find it difficult in these circumstances to voice that view, completely understand that you need to find a way to invest in the Observer, to build its own digital platform, to recruit new people. And I think that now the deal is done, now that it's clear that it is happening, I think that it feels very much like a new day. You feel as though people are beginning to say, all right, we've had this argument. The Scott Trust is not has made a decision, I think, to say, we have an incredible brand in The Guardian. We want to back it as it grows globally and digitally. And we found in Tortoise and a group of journalists that have come from the BBC, from a bunch of other papers, a group of people who respect editorial independence, who believe in the power of responsible journalism conducted to really high ethical standards.
Can we just play you Carol Cadwallader, who is one of the most respected Observer journalists who we spoke to on the podcast last week? Yeah. This is her take on.
Whatever you think of this deal, whatever you think of it, to go into it without a proper consultation with the journalists and with the readers who are your real financial stakeholders just shows a tone deafness and a sort of ignorance about the actual media landscape that we're in that this sort of the old-fashioned idea that you can just sort of dictate things from the top and people will accept this doesn't exist anymore. And that is why I find what's going on with The Guardian so troubling, because I think there are the seeds of its own impending implosion here.
So the nature of the process actually was precisely about consultation. I know you say, Emily, this happened quickly. We approached at the beginning of the year the Scott Trust, The Guardian review, consider internally the best way of proceeding, whether or not they're going to be a good steward for the Observer, then invite us to make a proposal. It's reviewed by their boards, by the independent financial advisors, due diligence. These things are obviously complicated. And then at the beginning of September, exactly in order to make sure that the journalists and others have a period of consultation, we opened it up. Now, it happened that within 48 hours, the union had come out unanimously to say, we're against this.
So you could have paused. You could have paused at that point saying, these people are all actually on strike right now.
No, they weren't, though. What happened was they took a view. We then went ahead and said, no, actually, look, we still want to try and talk to people. A team of us editors and the business team came in from Tortoise and made the presentation. And the reason why I think we're kind of looking backwards here, Emily, is that we made a case to invest in the Observer. We brought a group of people who brought a sum of investment into liberal journalism, into responsible evidence-based argument that has not been around for 25, 30 years. We haven't seen a commitment like this. And I think when you step back and say, why does this really matter? There is a huge amount of money, whether it's coming from conspiracy theorists or tech bros or those people who are just kind of news vandals. Sorry, excuse me 1 second, John. And actually, I think we should be really excited about the capacity to take another brand that was fading away, investing in it and renewing it.
So are we clear who the investors are for this project? Because all sorts of names are flying around of, kind of Saudi oil money or whatever it happens to be.
There's a lot flying around. There's been an incredible amount in this that has been wildly untrue. And I'm happy that it's really clear. All of our investors, current investors, are named on Companies House. Actually, they've all been out widely in the press. None of them are oil companies or oil money. And the new investors, we've also been named people like This Day, which is the investment vehicle of a guy called Gary Lubner, who's a big philanthropist focused on and also well known for being a donor to Labour. Standard Investments, which backs some of the new media startups in the US, things like Airmail and Puck and Pushkin. And so absolutely clearly, John, that there is absolutely none of that. And I appreciate people, sometimes say 1 + 1 = 11. It doesn't.
So is that a guarantee? Because a lot of Guardian journalists, are very naturally nervous about money that comes from fossil fuel companies, from big oil companies, whether it's Aramco in Saudi Arabia, whether it's, Rosneft, as was in Russia. I mean, is there a firm commitment you can make to them that Tortoise is not going to take that money in any shape or form?
So we are absolutely clear, first and foremost, about editorial independence, right? That absolutely there is no way that commercial money has any impact on our journalism. If we ever have to choose between the commercial and the story, we choose the story. Over and above that, I think there is a big question about how do you address advertising in the news business, not least because you're now in a world in which tech companies have enormous footprints, the food business does, but we've always had at Tortoise a very clear way of addressing how we make sure that the journalists and the newsroom themselves have a say in who we work with commercially.
Would you go as far as ruling out fossil fuel money?
So the Guardian has ruled it out. I think that there are obviously some companies, energy companies, that are doing enormously important things in terms of renewables, but also have, existing fossil fuel. I think you really need to look at each company and understand them better. I think the line for us, most importantly, is this editorial independence line. And the reason, Emily, I think it's so important is actually the real lever that a newsroom has to change the world is what it does editorially. It doesn't have much influence in terms of what it does commercially. If it's clear about its editorial independence, it can be sure that it can say exactly what it wants and it can address the climate crisis absolutely directly. That's what's most important.
Just on the model, I'm interested in the model that you've got. Have you got investors who've said to you, right, we'll put this money in, but we're expecting a return on investment of X% per year in a conventional business model? Or have you got people who are fond of you, James Harding, who like what you do, who like what the principles, which is what has kept Tortoise going for a long time? You've got wealthy benefactors who've kind of put in money because they like what you're trying to do. Is it people giving you money and saying, here's a pat on the back, see if you can make this fly? Or is it people coming in and saying, right, this is the spreadsheet, this is the business model?
This is also like a perfect question, in that it's neither of those things, John. So if you look at The Atlantic as a good example, The Atlantic was bought several years ago. It was losing about $20 million a year. It's a US magazine, and then they built out, alongside the print, a digital platform. Now reached about 1 million subscribers. It's gone from losing about $20 million to making 2 or 3 plus. And Nick Thompson, who's the CEO, says, our aim is to make a very small amount of money for a very long time. We want to create a sustainable future. And the reason why we look at The Observer and think there's the opportunity to do that is we believe people will pay for insightful quality journalism. Our investors are people who A, committed for the long term, B, sign up to principles of editorial independence, so they want to see us build a sustainable long-term future, not the version that you described, let's get the money out, nor something that is a charity case, but a sustainable, viable, vibrant voice of progressive politics, liberal values, and most importantly, responsible, evidence-based journalism, so that people who love arts and culture, or I should say food, or people who are interested in what's happening in the world and in the choices that we face as a country in our politics, have a place to come to. And historically, that has been The Observer, and we think there's an amazing opportunity for it to be so again.
So does that mean, just to go back to the earlier question, James, that we know, for example, that The Guardian has ruled out taking funding from any oil-based companies. Can you say right now, let's just get all this on the record, because it's not, we're voicing stuff that journalists have been telling us. That is their worry, that their editorial independence will be compromised by some of your, I don't know whether you'd call them bedfellows or partners, or some of the money that's coming in. How do you respond to them?
So I've worked at the Financial Times, the BBC, the Times, and now Tortoise. In every single case, right, there is always a very clear understanding of what's most important, editorial independence. And if you go back to the founding of Tortoise, we were absolutely clear that we are uncompromising, non-negotiable is our editorial independence. So any journalist, right, can have absolute confidence that there is no way that a commercial interest will interfere. And I've always put it really simply, if you have to worry what comes first, it's the story.
Benchmark what success looks like.
I hope that in a year, 2 years' time, firstly, you and the newsagents are going to be sitting around going, cool, we're talking about a lot of Observer stories. Look at the original investigations, right? We're talking about a lot of the ideas and points of view that are coming out of the Observer. Look at, the independent thinking. We love the way in which their podcasts, their long-form narrative journalism is reaching us both as pieces of storytelling as podcasts, but also that we can read them, digitally and in print. And through all of that, we've created a sustainable future for the Observer. It's growing its audience, so there are a group of people who are reading it in print, but really excitingly, there's a next generation of people who love it. And actually, I think, as I hope you can hear, there's something exceptionally special about the Observer, and that journalists who are going to be drawn to it and say, we want to be a part of this, we want to write for it, we want to report for it, we want to share our ideas in it. And I hope that in a year or two's time you're looking at it going, okay, well, they really did renew the Observer.
And just give us that commitment then, because you said at the beginning you'd like to see it in paper form for the next 5-10 years. If people are thinking, do I stay at the Observer? Is this going to exist for 10 years? Is that a commitment?
Of course. I mean, we're absolutely committed to
it being in print.
We're talking about for years and years and years to come. We're talking about trying to make a commitment for it, right, which lasts for a generation. Our point, Emily, was looking at something that was disappearing, right, that people weren't talking about, that people weren't joining. The staff had halved, the readership, the sales were down, by 70-odd%. We're trying to see a world in which print
comes back.
Is beautiful and wonderful and a wonderful experience. And at the same time, a bunch of people who, for very good reason, just don't get their news in print anymore, say, actually, there's something that I love about the Observer. I love its culture, I love its judgment, I love the originality of its storytelling, I love the way in which it enhances my life. It's still the best place for food, it's the best place for culture, and you'll see, I think, John, that it's going to give you something original in sport too.
James Harding, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks,
Thank
James.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So over the Christmas New Year period, we've recorded a number of episodes, and we've trailed what it was. What if? What if this had happened? What if that had happened? How would history have been different? Those sliding door moments. And actually, we weren't kind of sure whether they were going to work or not, and we had really enjoyed answering your what if. So you must tell us if it's worked or not. But as a way of a curtain
Tell
raiser,
us that it has worked. That'd be lovely.
Please, tell us. Be kind. But as a curtain raiser, we've got a what if from Carl Moore, and it's, what if the presenters of the newsagents never got into reporting? Where would you guys have gone? What was the path not taken?
No, go on. What's yours?
Well, go on. You going first. I was hoping you'd go first.
Well,
you used to work in a hairdresser's, didn't you?
I did. I was a terrible hairdresser.
Yeah.
I earned £6 a day, and I used to borrow all these little sort of, little colour kits and perming kits and sort of practice at home, but I wasn't very good at hair.
I was a petrol pump attendant in my gap year, and you had to sell as much oil as possible. You had to sell 5-litre cans of oil, which is where you got your pay incentive from. So I could have become a big oil baron, I think.
Yes, you would have become a big oil. In 92, I had 2 offers on the table. One was to go to Hong Kong, and one was to do an intern with a theatre company in Sacramento. And weirdly, the decision lay in that. I think Hong Kong one offered me a flat and the Sacramento one didn't, but I was thinking of going into directing.
How funny.
Yeah, how weird.
Directing. Yeah. What, you being bossy and telling people what to do?
Maybe. Well, it's all come full circle, you
yes,
see.
It really has. Oh, it really has. I don't know. I think I sort of thought about politics, of kind of, did I want to be a political actor? I just thought, I don't believe in anything quite enough. I could see the holes in everything. Yeah. So I thought better off picking the holes and saying, yes, but. Yeah. But you're saying that, sir, but. For me, it was either going to be an oil baron sort of starring in Dallas, as my own show, or journalism. have a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. See you in January. Bye-bye.
We'll see you the other side. Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.